It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and on this week's episode, we're on the cusp of another May the 4th celebration this weekend. I can tell you that I'm looking forward to Saturday. I'll explain why in a moment. Plus, I'll share with you my thoughts on the end of The Bad Batch and the finale of Season 3 of this amazing animated show. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. As always, if you want to find out more about My Nerd World, you can head on over to mynerdworld.net. Now, let's get to this week's episode.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now, you're coming together. Is your undoing. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it, a Star Wars show here for My Nerd World, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another podcast. If at any point you want to email me, you can do that, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be enjoying the show on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe, but also you can leave a comment up on YouTube as well. We're on the cusp, as my recording this would be May the 2nd, of another May 4th. May the 4th be with you, Star Wars holiday. And listen, I'm keeping my expectations in check this year. It seems like every single year I get really ramped up for some major announcement of some sort, and I'm not expecting anything of that nature coming up this weekend. We do have Tales of the Empire, the short animated series that will be dropping this weekend, and I am very excited for Tales of the Empire. I thought that Tales of the Jedi was fantastic, and any opportunity that we have at dark side content in any kind of sort of long form, I'm down for. It's one of the reasons why I was initially excited for The Acolyte, even though I have my own trepidations about that series now. Heading into this weekend, though, my May the 4th plans at the moment consist of going to see the re-release of The Phantom Menace on Saturday afternoon. I don't believe that I've ever spent... No, I know I haven't. I haven't ever spent a May the 4th going to the actual movies to see a Star Wars film, and this will be the first time that my youngest, Kyle, who's 17, will have seen any of the prequels on the big screen, apart from the sequel trilogy, which I believe he saw all of those on the big screen. The only other Star Wars film that he's seen on the big screen is The Empire Strikes Back, when they did its re-release right around the start of the COVID pandemic, on the backside of the pandemic as well. And I'm really excited to go see The Phantom Menace on the big screen again. The movie's far from perfect, but over the years I've come to appreciate it even more so than I already did. I personally really never had an issue with The Phantom Menace. I felt that it set the stage very well for the prequels that are different in their own right, but the most consistent of Star Wars trilogies, of all three trilogies, in my opinion. And I'll never forget going to the movies in Arizona for the first time and doing an advanced screening for The Phantom Menace. And I remember walking out excited about the film, having enjoyed the film, but I do recall having some mixed emotions because you just can't ever... Films can never live up to that kind of hype. For me, it wasn't so much what I saw on the big screen. I went back to see it again and again and again. It really came down to just being able to live up to the hype. I had exactly the same sort of feeling walking out of The Force Awakens, a movie that I was arguably more excited for. I think mostly because we had reached a place where I don't think we had any expectation to see more Star Wars films after the prequels were done, and that J.J. Abrams, one of my favorite modern film directors, was behind The Force Awakens, had me through the moon excited for it and the run-up to it and doing the podcast at the time. But I remember walking out of the theater from The Phantom Menace having very much the same sort of mixed feelings that I had walking out of seeing The Phantom Menace, even though both of those films I absolutely love. I'm also very excited to be able to see a glimpse of The Acolyte, which will be shown prior to the starting of the film this weekend. As far as my other May the 4th plans, apart from wearing Star Wars gear, I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm kind of hoping, and I haven't mentioned this because my 17-year-old tends to be a bit of a curmudgeon if you try to go and get him on board with movie plans ahead of time, right? He wants it to be his idea. But I'm kind of hoping he's going to want to partake in Attack of the Clones later on in the day, because I know I'm going to want to follow it up with Attack of the Clones, because that is a film that I absolutely love, even though most fans at this point in time place it way down on the list of their favorite films. I've also been holding off, as I've been watching Ahsoka again, I've been holding off a bit on my rewatch of Ahsoka. I've been holding off on the finale. So I've had the last episode queued up now for about a week and a half as my Grogu Bluetooth speaker turns off. I was listening to a podcast before I started recording today. So I've got that queued up, and then we'll see what else the day brings. Typically on a May the 4th holiday, I usually only watch Star Wars. I know that on Saturday night there will be protests from the family about that, but that'll be the majority of my watching, because I tend to watch a lot of TV and movies on the weekend. I'd love to hear from you. We can talk about it on next week's show, what your plans are, or what your plans were and how you executed them, what you did for May the 4th. I'd absolutely love to hear from you. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. It's a reminder to, as I get into a bit of my comments about the Cavalry has arrived, the season finale for the Bad Batch Season 3, Star Wars is about family. Whether it's families inside the storytelling in and of itself, all you have to do is go through the films and you know what I'm talking about, whether it's actual blood relations or just groups of individuals coming together to become families on their own. Certainly that's what's happened in the Bad Batch. You know, that's what the stories are about in the core of the cinematic releases, right? But also families that go and enjoy these films. Families that grew up on these. I mean, it is the experience around Star Wars is also about families. I remember my stepmom making a comment about that on the release of Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, when she and my father came out to see the last movie in the sequel trilogy with us, and just, you know, how important it is for families and how we enjoy these as families together. We'll be going to see The Phantom Menace, myself, my youngest Kyle, and my wife Melinda. I think my oldest Logan will probably be off flying somewhere that day. But we've been enjoying this, the three of us, because Logan's been busy. He has joined us a few times, but the three of us have been enjoying watching Season 3 of The Bad Batch together, as we've watched all of the Star Wars Disney Plus series, whether it's live action or the cartoons. It's all about family, and it's part of what makes Star Wars special. And this season finale for The Bad Batch was also truly special. So let's get into it.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So through the course of the Bad Batch Season 3, I've been talking about the episodes on the podcast. I haven't been going into great detail, really just sharing my surface-level thoughts about every episode. Most other podcasts, and I know you listen to a lot of podcasts, they'll go into great detail and nuances about the shows, and I like to typically take sort of an emotional angle and just give you my instinctive reaction thoughts to the episodes, and I'm going to do something similar today. There was one aspect of the finale that I will focus on, and that was the very, very end. And that is the epilogue. I'll talk about that here in just a moment. But I was pleased with the finale of The Bad Batch. I have my slight gripes, but they really fall in line with the rest of Season 3 and the desire of what I wanted to see versus what we got. And that is no different than this final episode. It's not even a complaint at all. I mean, the series has been incredibly consistent from beginning to end. Once again, Star Wars has created another character, and albeit another female character, that I absolutely love in Omega, or Omega. She is a fantastic character, which made the epilogue and the finale of this episode even all that more emotional. I appreciate all of Clone Force 99 and the Bad Batch group. I love those guys. They're great. But really, I was most drawn to and compelled watching the story of Omega, especially given the connections that it potentially has to the future content that's already been released or that is going to be produced. She herself as a character was just a ton of fun to watch. I love this series for her alone. I will go back and watch The Bad Batch for the Omega character in and of itself, most specifically. When it comes to this finale, it really was almost a wrap on all of the Clone Wars. Certainly the Clone Wars series with that final set of episodes that we were so privileged to get a couple of years back, just absolutely put the best period it possibly could have on that amazing animated series, especially with those closing shots with Vader on that planet walking towards the helmets of the fallen clone troopers after what had taken place through Order 66 and the adventures and the events that took place with Ahsoka. Clone Wars wrapped up in that final season was absolutely perfect, in my opinion. That being said, there were still more stories to be told. And those stories were clearly told here in the Bad Batch series. I wonder whether or not we'll still get any more animated content within this era. If we don't, and I'm kind of thinking we're done with animated content from the Clone Wars era, I think this was it. This episode of The Bad Batch and this season of The Bad Batch really did put the final period on what was left of the stories to tell from the Clone Wars that started with Revenge of the Sith. A couple of details about wrapping up the series. You have the finality between Rampart and Nala Se after his destruction of Kamino. And again, spoilers throughout this episode. You have this moment between Rampart and Nala Se where, once again, they're faced with the cloning technology. He seems to have the upper hand, only for Nala Se to destroy any possibility of using the tests that were being done on Omega and the clones relating to Project Necromancer, destroying those in one foul swoop with her detonator charge, killing her and Rampart. An incredibly emotional scene, and again, almost her revenge and closing the book on that chapter and what Rampart did to Kamino. And again, this episode serving as an endpoint for the prequels as well, it really also serves in it that endpoint of the story relating to cloning and genetics from Kamino and the Kaminoans' involvement in it. This was the last little bit that we've seen of the remnants of Kamino and what the Kaminoans did in terms of their cloning technology. It ends with that explosion on Tantus. My only gripe of the episode in the series is that I was disappointed that we didn't get further details on Project Necromancer. I think we're so accustomed to wanting big, huge reveals, and having spent so much time talking about Project Necromancer, the young Force-sensitive, the children, the Force-sensitive children that were in this Season 3, and then to the point where Rampart wants to know all the details, only to cut away and come back after Nala Se has told him everything. I really wanted to know specifically. It's easy to deduce. Okay. This series closed the door on the Kaminoans cloning efforts, and I had speculated in previous episodes that perhaps we had two different efforts relating to cloning and the Emperor running in tandem, that which we saw within the Bad Batch prior to the events of the original trilogy, and then that which we've more recently seen within The Mandalorian and the attempts of Moff Gideon. Now, it appears that there were not two efforts, there's been one effort, but the efforts that were taking place on Tantus were put to an end in what Nala Se did, the destruction of all the blood samples. And then Tarkin's very pointed and sort of goosebump inducing, divert all your resources to Project Stardust, which of course is the Death Star, being Project Stardust, as we learned in Rogue One. So I liked that the Bad Batch told its story and gave us an endpoint to things that are attached to future storytelling, but also don't muddy those waters at all. We know that there was a cloning project taking place. We know that it involved Emperor Palpatine. We know how important it was to him, but we also know that the efforts that they were attempting have all been blown up in the wake of that destruction on Tantus, which only goes and provides further justification and importance to what we see of the cloning efforts when we get to The Mandalorian and what Moff Gideon is trying to do. And if you take it to its conclusion of what we know of the story, by the time you get to The Rise of Skywalker, and this is, again, assuming Project Necromancer has to do with the return of Palpatine and the creation of Snoke as well, you can kind of deduce that the Emperor has not been successful in perfecting those cloning efforts, in how decrepit and grotesque he is at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, only to finally reach back to his full Sith form that we became accustomed to at the end of Revenge of the Sith, taking the Force life out of the dyad of Ben Solo and Rey Skywalker. So in that sense, I really appreciated what they did with the Bad Batch in at least laying out and helping us to understand, all right, these efforts have been going on for a long time. Tarkin finally decided to call it quits and put all the effort into going and building the Death Star, only to have those efforts continue later on, and probably in the background of what we saw happening during the events of the original trilogy, which certainly could play into future storytelling relating to Omega based off of what happens to her at the end of the episode. It was a fitting end for our heroes. Going through the episode, watching the episode with my family, I think I felt the same way that Kyle did. We don't really know if our heroes are going to make it out. I know there was disappointment on Kyle's part. He was really hoping for a return of Tech, but I'm glad it didn't happen because we've seen enough individuals who have been injured or stabbed, even though I don't have a problem with it, but enough people who you thought were dead come back. And I think that for the sake of the storytelling, it carries a lot more weight and certainly meaning for Omega, especially in that closing shot of her on her ship, having the broken goggles of Tech sitting there on the control dashboard as she flies away from Pabu. That being said, you didn't really know if our characters were going to make it out of this episode, and I'm glad that they did. I thought the addition of the reprogrammed clones as these almost Knights of Ren assassins was a lot of fun. Didn't feel like we needed much more backstory on them. There was a few moments where I was wondering if whether or not we were going to see Tech, but he was going to be in one of these outfits of these reprogrammed lethal assassins that had been created there on Tantus by Hemlock. There was one particular shot that I thought was interesting, and I'm pretty sure it was there intentionally, when one of the main clone assassins for the Empire, his helmet was off, and they showed a quick shot of him putting his helmet back on, and a couple of shots of those assassins with their helmets off, and you could clearly see that they were just your standard clones. Also, the Crosshair redemption was handled really well. The character arc of all these characters was really fantastic throughout the series. And while some episodes in season 1 and certainly 1 and 2, we had sort of your adventures of the week, you still got those character developments, and the one that they really focused a lot of attention on and had a fitting payoff was really Crosshair. I thought that it was really interesting that Crosshair, dealing with whatever he was, given what he had gone through, having been captured by the Empire, and all of the trauma that he was dealing with, and his shaking hand that was keeping him from being able to effectively be able to carry out the same shots as he was before. The fact that he ended up having to have his hand cut off in order to achieve that shot at the end of the episode, I thought was really, really well crafted. Only after losing something, his hand, was he able to go and achieve that thing which he felt like he couldn't do anymore at a time when he needed to more than ever. Really, really clever story writing. And listen, I attribute that to Dave Filoni. He's producing the best Star Wars storytelling, and has, post George Lucas, better than anybody else, in my opinion. And that's a really, really good example of that. He had to lose that thing that he was trying to fix in order to get to the place where he wanted to be. And I thought that was a very clever writing, and just really good, solid writing. But honestly, the chef's kiss for the finale was the epilogue that took place at the end of this episode.
This is not going to go the way you think.
And it didn't go for me. I really thought that the closing shot of our heroes, including Omega, on Pabu when it went to black was going to be the final shot of the series. And I don't want to say I would have been disappointed if that was the case. Maybe a little bit. It would have been fitting, given this series, that it didn't really take a lot of risks. It gave us clues to the future, but its purpose wasn't to really definitively fill in gaps. It was to add in context, but to tell the story of these characters. And in that case, having a fade to black shot of our heroes having endured what they endured, coming out victorious. Dave Filoni has said many times that, Star Wars needs to make you feel good. And in that moment, I felt good, even though I was, sad because I wanted a little bit more. And then the adrenaline starts to pump when we realize that, we're not at the end yet. And we see the story continues as the screen goes from black and then begins to show us that we're in another location at night on Pabu. And I want to read to you here the description that I found online from inverse.com, and talking about the epilogue. Oh, excuse me, this is not from inverse.com. This is actually from this comes from Star Wars Fandom Wiki. My bad. But here's how they describe the epilogue, and then I want to share with you my thoughts on it. Years later, an adult Omega walks into the Pabu Cove, where the Bad Batch have established a home aboard a repurposed Rho-class shuttle. Gonki is also present and walks down the gangplank. Batcher is also around. Hunter confronts Omega about sneaking out. Omega tells Hunter that she's decided to join the rebellion as a pilot. I almost get emotional saying those words again. Hunter says that they wanted to keep her safe, but respects her wishes. While watching the moon, Omega tells Hunter that he and his brothers had fought enough and that she is ready. Hunter says that he's not ready, but hugs her before she leaves. Omega gets Hunter to promise to look after Crosshair, Wrecker, and Batcher before she departs on the shuttle. Hunter tells Omega that they will be there if she needs them. Omega departs aboard the shuttle with Gonki. Hunter salutes before she leaves, and Batcher is sad, but Hunter reassures the Hound that Omega will be fine. As Omega flies into the night sky, Pabu glitters with streetlights. And listen, I'm getting emotional just reading that, and that's basically just a straight-up description of what took place. And I'm not going to lie, I was filled with tears at the end of that episode for a number of different reasons. I was filled with tears at the end of that episode during the epilogue. For one, at least in the moment, as I was sort of thinking about why am I getting so emotional, there was a part of it that really took me back to my childhood in where I believed in the moment that Omega was heading. Like, I was half expecting to see her fly into hyperspace only to emerge outside of, say, Yavin and land at the Rebel base before we close out, before we iris out and fade to black. Going to join a rebellion and continue the fight that she started against the Empire, having now grown up and becoming, a pilot and joining the rebellion, taking me back to the original trilogy. The more I thought about it, though, the more I realized, no, a lot of the reason why I'm getting emotional over this is because this is what happens to sort of all parents when their children eventually have to go out on their own. And while this is storytelling of a galaxy far, far away, and there's that attachment to it, there's the family attachment to it. And I'm blessed to still have both of my boys at home. Logan won't be here for too much longer as he goes through his own flight training to become a pilot, and I'm sure that was subconsciously in the back of my mind, as I know that my oldest will leave the nest at some point in the next year or two, as he is a pilot and will become a pilot, and eventually Kyle will leave as well, and we'll be empty nesters here. Within the Star Wars universe, this character that I've grown to love over the course of these 3 seasons, immediately to see her grown up brought tears to my eyes, just because it was something that I wasn't expecting to see, and hoping to see further tales of Omega in the future. And again, knowing what we know about battles that will come and that she is going to join that rebellion, and having experienced all that content and knowing what's out there and the adventures that she could be partaking in, also, it just let the tears fly. I thought it was an absolute, again, chef's kiss on this finale. Now, to the question of exactly how far into the timeline, as I move away from the emotional aspect of it and we get to the storytelling aspect of it. On the Star Wars fandom wiki, it says that the events of the Bad Batch took place initially for ABY. Okay. So I'm sorry, 2-year ABY, and then the epilogue took place in year 4 of ABY. Am I getting that? Let me just focus. I'm getting this wrong. I just wrote down, for the sake of argument, in the epilogue that the events of the epilogue allegedly take place 4 years after the Battle of Yavin. Now, this has not been substantiated. This is just what somebody wrote on Fandom Wiki. So this would have put Omega potentially going to join the rebellion right up to the run-up to the attack on the Death Star 2 and Return of the Jedi. So this would put her joining the rebellion pretty much any time after or around the events of The Empire Strikes Back. Okay. That makes a little bit more sense to me than her joining up pre the attack on the Death Star, simply because when I think about that attack on the Death Star, it seemed as if the rebellion was relatively small based off of what we know, and that attack came about very quickly. So when I go to another source, Inverse, they make this comment regarding Omega being grown up in the epilogue. Because of her age and the nature of the time jump in Bad Batch, Omega could reappear in several Star Wars projects at any time. And because Omega is a clone, she literally carries the DNA of the entire franchise, making her, in some ways, the perfect microcosm of all Star Wars heroes. She was born from a terrible situation and became, over time, one of the greatest beacons of hope. And for that reason alone, this doesn't feel like an end of Omega's story. It's probably just the beginning. So, as an example, I mean, she's young enough here where I'm trying to figure out age-wise what she would be based off of this. And I think she'd probably still be in her sort of mid-teens. Not mid-teens, but 18, 19 years old, essentially. And because of her DNA, they can fuss with how much she ages. But when you consider the fact that DNA-wise, not only is she carrying the entire franchise, but she has a direct connection to Boba Fett, I think there's a potential that Omega could end up being in the Mandalorian Grogu film that is supposed to begin starting its filming this month. I don't think there's any doubt that we haven't seen the end of Omega's story, and it makes sense that they didn't go into further detail and they left plenty of wiggle room without being too final on the stories and some of the threads that they were on during Season 3 of The Bad Batch. We know that she's older, so we took care of that problem, because if they had ended it on that shot of the group of them prior to the epilogue time jump, there would have been a lot of questions. Well, where did they go? What did they do? We now know that the remainder of, whether it's Hunter, Crosshair, and Wrecker, we know that they're older now, doing whatever it is they're doing. Hunter promises to look out for them. He's clearly older. And Omega has grown up and she's joined the rebellion. That's all you need to know. So as we look towards future storytelling, there are plenty of ways, as Inverse said, that she can be included, and I guarantee she's going to be included. It's one thing that they have been doing well as it comes to the content creation that Disney has, is that sort of planting the seeds to be able to use these characters. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least bit if she ends up becoming a central figure in some of the storytelling, especially relating to future season, the season 2 of Ahsoka or the Mandalorian Grogu film, or most specifically, the movie that Filoni is going to be directing will culminate all of the post-Return of the Jedi storytelling that's been taking place on the Disney Plus streaming series. So, with all of that, I thought it was a fantastic finish. An episode that I will go back and watch again, if anything, just to see that finale, because I just thought that was awesome. And it reminded me of why I love Star Wars and the ability that Star Wars has to evoke that kind of emotion in me when the stories are told right, man, and they nail it. They just absolutely nail it. And when it comes to science fiction and space opera, it still doesn't get any better than Star Wars, despite all of the complaining that seems to take place around this franchise as of late. As always, what do you think? I want to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave me a comment there. Before I let you go, I hope you will support my Nerd World and the podcast by, if you like to read or you like to listen to books, taking a chance on my EMBARK science fiction space opera series. 7 books in all in the series, starting with book 1. And in book 1, Taft Guardia picked the right day to upgrade his ship. The stars are within reach as rival megacorporations D-Corp and Entercon have made interstellar travel possible and spaceflight available to the masses. But when an industrial accident inside D-Corp sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, all of Earth is at risk. Unaware of the disaster, Taft agrees to help fellow pilot Keitha Morrow investigate a cryptic message she suddenly received from her aerospace engineer father, who died 1 year earlier. As the ruthless Cent Argum D-Corp attempts to exploit the disaster, Taft and Catha make a shocking discovery that may be the only hope of saving Earth's evacuees from the tyranny of D-Corp's evil leader. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member and support My Nerd World with science fiction. Written for adults, but great for ages 11 and older. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. It's available in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. You can also purchase your paperbacks directly from me if you like. Just email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. But I encourage you to head on over to amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and pick up the entire, not only just Book 1. If you like your science fiction, space opera, which I know you do, if you like it epic, filled with romance, action, and really cool technology, EMBARK is perfect for you. Again, at amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Thank you so much for checking out this episode. I look forward to hearing from you and what you did for May the 4th, and I'll give you my thoughts on Tales of the Empire on next week's episode. Wherever you are, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, I hope you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.